All right, so you want to understand the entire history of China. Ambitious.
Yeah.
But hey, that's what we do here. Today, we're diving into a YouTube documentary called The Entire History of China, Ancient to Modern 4K documentary.
It's a pretty epic story.
Dynasties, rising and falling, emperors both brilliant and brutal, inventions that changed the world. It's going to be a whirlwind tour.
You know what's really cool about this documentary? It starts with a story, like not just dry facts and dates, but a tale of a leader who tamed China's legendary floods.
Oh, yeah. Yu the Great.
Yeah, Yu the Great earns the throne, and bam, the Xia dynasty is born.
Yu the Great. Not just a flood fighter, but the guy who kicks off this whole idea of the mandate of heaven. The idea that emperors get their right to rule from heaven itself, but heaven can also take it away if they mess up. That's a pretty big deal throughout Chinese history.
Huge, yeah.
Yeah.
And the documentary points out how things shift from picking leaders based on merit to just handing power down through family. Yu wanted his minister of justice to take over, but nope. After Yu dies, his son Shi gets the throne just because he's related. That sets the stage for thousands of years of dynasties.
A pattern we'll be seeing again and again, right? So next up, we've got the Shang Dynasty.
Wow.
Bronze weapons, oracle bones. These are the folks who give us the first written records of Chinese history. Imagine having those kinds of insights into daily life from over 3,600 years ago.
It's mind-blowing. Those oracle bone inscriptions are like a gold mine for historians.
Yeah.
But the Shang dynasty also had some, well, let's just say interesting customs.
Oh, like what?
Seashells for money. Kind of cool.
Kind of like that.
Yeah. But also human sacrifice and burying servants alive with their masters.
Ooh, a little less cool?
Yeah, not so much.
Yeah, talk about taking your work with you to the afterlife. Gruesome stuff. But it tells you a lot about their beliefs and how power worked back then. Then comes the Zhou dynasty, China's longest lasting at nearly 800 years. They usher in the Iron Age, build these huge irrigation projects, and even figure out horseback riding. This is where China's impact on world history really starts to ramp up.
And don't forget the explosion of philosophical thought. Confucianism, legalism, and Taoism all pop up during this period.
Wow.
We're talking Confucius, Lao Tzu. Their ideas shaped not just China, but have influenced thinking about leadership and society across the globe. I mean, these are ideas that people are still grappling with today.
Thousands of years later.
Yeah.
Incredible.
Yeah.
Okay, here's where things get really interesting. The Warring States period. 7 former vassals all fighting for control of China.
Oh, yeah.
It's brutal and chaotic. But it's also where we get Sun Tzu's The Art of War. Military strategy and deception were key. Warfare gets way more complex with bigger armies, longer battles. The whole game changes.
Yeah, you see a real shift in how wars are fought during this time. It's not just about brute force anymore.
It's about outsmarting your opponent.
Exactly. And from all this chaos, you have Ying Zheng,
Oh yeah, this guy's a trip.
rises from the Qin state. This guy's story is wild. Ambition, ruthlessness, a quest for immortality. He eventually conquers all of China.
Ambition is putting it lightly. The documentary walks us through his military campaigns, these key battles, and even this failed assassination attempt where they tried to take him out with a poison dagger hidden in a general's severed head. Talk about making a statement.
Yeah, Ying Zheng was not someone to be trifled with, but he gets it done, unifies China, declares himself Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor, and the Qin dynasty begins.
Strict laws, standardized money and writing, and the first version of the Great Wall all happen under his rule. Just imagine the sheer scale of that project and all the lives it must have cost.
Yeah, the Great Wall was a monumental undertaking. It's a testament to the Qin dynasty's power and the emperor's ambition, but also to the brutality of his reign.
You can't build something that massive without a lot of forced labor. And speaking of massive projects, we can't forget the Terracotta Army. Qin Shi Huang wanted his power to last forever, so he has this army of clay soldiers created to protect him in the afterlife.
It's incredible. When they discovered the Terracotta Army in the 20th century, it was huge.
I mean, thousands of these incredibly detailed figures, each one unique.
Yeah, it's like a window into Qin Shi Huang's mind, his obsession with power, and his belief in the afterlife.
It's both fascinating and a little bit creepy. It's like, what was going on in this guy's head?
Well, he was all about legalism, a philosophy that emphasizes strict laws and harsh punishments. So it makes sense that his vision of the afterlife would be just as regimented.
Right, order above all else. Okay, so from that, we shift to the Han Dynasty, founded by Liu Bang, a peasant who overthrows the Qin. They bring back Confucianism, develop a civil service, and, get this, they establish the Silk Road.
The The Silk Road, yeah. This is where things get really interesting. It wasn't just about trading stuff, it was about ideas and culture spreading.
Right, religions like Buddhism make their way to China.
Exactly. All sorts of things traveling vast distances. This interconnectedness had a huge impact on world history.
It's like the original internet. And speaking of fascinating figures, this is where we meet Empress Lu,
Oh, yeah, she's one you don't want to mess with.
Emperor Gaozu's widow.
Ugh.
Powerful, ambitious, and let's just say she wasn't afraid to get rid of her rivals. The story of how she dealt with Lady Qi, one of the emperor's favorite concubines, is straight out of a drama.
It's a pretty brutal story. Empress Lu shows just how much influence women had on Chinese history, even in a patriarchal society.
They may not have always been in the spotlight, but they could wield immense power behind the scenes. All right, get ready, because we're about to speed through a whole bunch of dynasties.
Oh.
Dynasties galore. We've got the Jin, Sudi, Tang, Song, the Yuan dynasty, that's the Mongols, the Ming, and the Qing. Each one with its own ups and downs, its brilliant rulers, and its epic failures. Are you ready for this rapid-fire round?
Hit me with it.
All right, so first up, we've got the Jin dynasty. They're kind of short-lived, but they pave the way for the Sui dynasty, which unifies China after centuries of division.
And the Sui dynasty, they're known for the Grand Canal, this massive engineering project that connected North and South China.
But their rule is pretty harsh, and they eventually get overthrown by the Tang dynasty. And this is where things get really golden. The Tang dynasty is considered a golden age of Chinese culture.
Think poetry, art, music flourishing.
They even had the first female emperor, Wu Zixin.
Oh yeah, she was a fascinating figure. A real power player.
But like all good things, the Tang dynasty eventually comes to an end. And then we have the Song dynasty, another period of great cultural and economic prosperity.
They're known for their innovations in science and technology, like gunpowder and the compass.
But they're also constantly under threat from invaders from the north. Which brings us to the Yuan dynasty, established by Kublai Khan and the Mongols.
Talk about a shakeup. This is the first time that all of China is ruled by a foreign power.
The Mongols were fierce warriors, and they really left their mark on China. But their rule didn't last forever, and eventually they're overthrown by the Ming dynasty.
The Ming dynasty is known for rebuilding the Great Wall, for their beautiful porcelain, and for sending out these massive treasure fleets across the Indian Ocean.
Led by the famous Admiral Zheng He. Then comes the last dynasty, the Qing dynasty, which ruled for almost 300 years.
They were Manchu people from the north, not Han Chinese. But they adopted a lot of Chinese customs and traditions.
Yeah, and they oversaw a period of relative peace and prosperity, at least at first. But by the 19th century, things start to go downhill fast.
That's right. And this brings us to a turning point, the beginning of what's known as China's century of humiliation. This is where internal struggles collide with the ambitions of Western powers. It's not a pretty picture.
No, not at all. And the Opium Wars are right at the center of it all.
So Great Britain is hooked on Chinese tea.
Right, everyone loves their tea.
But China's not buying much from them. So there's a trade imbalance. Britain needs something to sell to China, and they find it in opium, which they're growing in their colonies in India.
Right, so they create a market for a highly addictive drug just to make a profit. Not cool. And the documentary doesn't shy away from showing the devastating impact of opium addiction in China. Millions became addicts, the economy takes a hit, and silver is flowing out of the country. The King Emperor tries to ban opium, but the British weren't having it. They saw a market, and they were going to exploit it no matter what.
And that leads to the First Opium War. Chinese officials seize and destroy British opium, battles break out at sea. It's a clash of worldviews, and greed wins.
It ends badly for China. The Treaty of Nanking forces them to open up more ports to foreign trade, give Hong Kong to Britain, and pay huge amounts of money in reparations. It's the first of many unequal treaties that chip away at China's power and sovereignty.
And as if things weren't bad enough already, then you have the Taiping Rebellion. Imagine a China ruled by a guy who claims he's the brother of Jesus. It wasn't just a rebellion, it was a massive clash of ideologies and religion.
It's wild. Hong Zhiquan, the leader of this rebellion, believes he's on a divine mission to overthrow the Qing dynasty. Gathers millions of followers, promising a heavenly kingdom of great peace. But it was a story of religious fanaticism, social upheaval, and brutality on both sides.
The documentary doesn't hold back on the horrific details.
No, it's pretty graphic.
Millions died in the Taiping Rebellion, not just from the fighting, but also from famine and disease. And then there's the Tianjin incident,
Oh, this is a dark one.
this horrifying internal purge within the rebellion itself.
Yeah, like things weren't bad enough already.
Yang Shiqing, one of Hong's top guys, starts saying he's the real voice of God.
Oh, no.
Hong doesn't like that, so he orders a massacre of Yang and his followers. Tens of thousands were killed.
Just brutal infighting.
It's a reminder that power struggles happen everywhere, even within movements that claim to be divinely inspired.
For sure. But despite all this infighting, the Taiping Rebellion was a serious threat to the Qing dynasty. They controlled huge areas, set up their own capital in Nanjing, and tried to implement these radical social reforms.
Yeah, they were serious about creating a new kind of society.
And at first, some Western powers actually kind of liked the Taipings, but then the rebellion gets more and more violent and starts to threaten Western trade interests, so that sympathy disappeared pretty quickly.
Right, it's all about self-interest in the end. The British and French end up supporting the Qing dynasty, giving them weapons and training.
And so the Taiping Rebellion is eventually crushed, but it left China deeply wounded and even more vulnerable to those Western powers.
Absolutely, it set the stage for even more exploitation.
Hmm.
Which brings us to, you guessed it,
Not another one.
the Second Opium War.
Sigh.
Western powers still want more access to Chinese markets, so they use a minor incident with a British ship as an excuse to go to war.
It's just blatant power grabbing.
Absolutely. Britain and France, joined by the United States and Russia, forced China to sign even more unequal treaties, giving them more trade concessions, opening up more ports, and even legalizing the opium trade.
Can you believe that they legalized the very drug that caused so much suffering?
It shows you how weak China had become on the world stage.
Yeah, it's a pretty low point. And the Second Opium War also saw the burning of the old Summer Palace in Beijing, this incredible place filled with art and cultural treasures.
A deliberate act of humiliation aimed at breaking China's spirit.
It's heartbreaking. The Opium Wars and the Taiping Rebellion were major turning points.
Yeah.
China went from being this powerful, self-sufficient empire to struggling to survive in the face of Western imperialism.
It's a pretty steep fall from grace. And now the story shifts to Japan. While China is dealing with all this internal conflict and pressure from the West, Japan is modernizing and expanding at an incredible pace.
Yeah, they're really on the rise.
The First Sino-Japanese War in 1894 was a huge wake-up call for China.
What happened?
Japan, with its modern navy and well-trained army, completely crushes the Chinese forces.
Wow. It's like a replay of the Opium Wars, just with a different player.
Exactly. China's outdated military and weak leadership just couldn't compete. The defeat was humiliating.
Adding another layer to the century of humiliation.
It's tough to watch. China had to give Taiwan to Japan, pay more reparations, and acknowledge Korea's independence.
It's like they're getting carved up piece by piece.
It's a dark time, and this loss fuels Chinese nationalism and the growing feeling that the Qing dynasty is just not capable of leading the country anymore.
Something has to change.
Yeah, and that leads to the Boxer Rebellion.
This is the one with the secret society, right?
Right, it was a violent uprising against foreign influence in China, driven by all this resentment over the unequal treaties and this feeling that Chinese culture and traditions were under attack.
They wanted to kick out the foreigners.
Exactly. The Boxers, the secret society with some pretty mystical beliefs, target foreigners and Chinese Christians.
Why Christians?
Well, they saw them as collaborators with the foreign powers that were, in their view, destroying China's soul.
Ah, I see. So what did they do?
They attacked foreign embassies in Beijing and killed missionaries and Chinese converts. They thought they were invincible, possessed by spirits that made them immune to bullets.
Wow. And how did that work out for them?
Not well. An international force made up of soldiers from all the major powers came in and crushed the rebellion.
And China had to pay for it, right?
Oh, yeah. Even more reparations and more concessions to those foreign powers. It just kept getting worse for the Qing dynasty.
It's like one humiliation after another. So by the early 20th century, the Qing dynasty is hanging on by a thread.
Pretty much.
Rebellions are popping up everywhere, and there's this new generation of revolutionaries who want to end the dynasty and create a modern republic.
And this is where Dr. Sun Yat-sen enters the picture.
He's like the George Washington of China.
That's a good comparison. He's this key figure in the movement to overthrow the Qing dynasty.
He was a doctor, right?
Yeah, he was trained as a doctor, but he became a revolutionary, traveling the world, rallying support for his cause.
So what was his vision for China?
He wanted a republic based on his three principles of the people:
Which were?
nationalism, democracy, and people's livelihood. Basically, a modern, unified, and prosperous China.
Sounds good to me.
It did to a lot of people. And in 1911, the Xinhai Revolution erupts.
The revolution that ends the dynasties.
Exactly. A series of uprisings and mutinies all across the country.
And what happens to the emperor?
The last king-emperor, a young boy named Puyi, is forced to abdicate. Thousands of years of dynastic rule in China come to an end. Just like that.
Wow, the closing of one chapter and the beginning of a whole new one.
It's a moment full of both upheaval and potential. China steps into the modern world with this new republic, but the road ahead is anything but smooth.
As we'll see in part 2.
And you know, that revolution, it really set the stage for everything that comes next. But it wasn't a clean break from the past. I mean, the Republic of China was founded in 1912, yeah. But they ran into a whole new set of problems. You had all these warlords just carving up the country.
Warlords.
Yeah, these regional military leaders, basically each one fighting to control their own little piece of the pie.
Definitely not the unified modern China that Sun Yat-sen had in mind.
No, not at all. And it's during all this chaos that you see two major forces emerge.
Okay.
Sun Yat-sen's Kuomintang, or KMT, and then there's the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP.
So two very different groups, both wanting to unify China.
Exactly, but with radically different ideas about how to do that. Sun Yat-sen's KMT, they were all about nationalism, building a strong, modern China based on his three principles.
Right, nationalism, democracy, and people's livelihood.
Right. The CCP, on the other hand, they were looking to Marx and Lenin for inspiration.
Two very different ideologies.
Oh, yeah. The KMT wanted to modernize within the existing system, whereas the CCP, they wanted to tear the whole thing down and start over with a socialist revolution.
So you can see how that's going to cause some problems.
Yeah, major conflict brewing there. And all of this is happening while Japan is watching very closely, waiting for a chance to take advantage of China's instability.
Oh yeah, Japan's been on the move.
The documentary reminds us that these internal struggles were happening on a global stage with some pretty dangerous players lurking in the shadows.
Yeah, definitely not happening in a vacuum.
No. And that leads us to 1931. The Japanese invasion of Manchuria throws a huge wrench in the works. It's a stark reminder that China's internal conflicts were playing out in a world with some very dangerous actors.
A wake-up call for sure.
Yeah, so now you've got this three-way power struggle, the KMT, the CCP, and Japan, all vying for control of China.
A powder keg just waiting to explode.
And explode it does. The Second Sino-Japanese War kicks off in 1937, and it's just absolutely brutal.
Yeah, the documentary really doesn't hold back on showing the horrors of the Japanese occupation.
Especially the Nanjing Massacre.
Oh yeah, it's a tough one to watch.
Hundreds of thousands of civilians murdered, countless women raped. A horrific chapter.
It's a chilling reminder of what happens when nationalism and militarism run unchecked.
Mhm.
And get this, right in the middle of fighting this war against Japan, the KMT and the CCP.
Wait, they form an alliance.
They form an alliance. Can you believe that?
Talk about strange bedfellows. It really shows how desperate the situation was.
Yeah, it really puts things in perspective. But the documentary highlights that even while they were fighting a common enemy, the tension between the two groups never really went away.
Right, there was always that underlying rivalry. It was a temporary truce.
And that conflict comes back with a vengeance in 1945. World War II ends, and the Chinese Civil War reignites.
KMT versus CCP, round 2.
And leading the CCP is Mao Zedong. I mean, he's such a fascinating, complex figure.
Definitely. The documentary does a good job showing his rise to power, his strategic brilliance, especially during the Long March, and his charisma.
He was a master of propaganda.
Right.
He knew how to connect with people.
Absolutely. And the Long March itself, it's a testament to the CCP's resilience.
I mean, trekking 6,000 miles, facing starvation, disease, constant attacks.
It's hard to believe anyone survived.
But they did. And it's like that experience forged them into this incredibly strong fighting force. By the time the Civil War restarted, they were better equipped, better organized, and they had the support of the peasantry.
So they're a force to be reckoned with.
And the KMT just couldn't keep up.
Yeah.
By 1949, they're defeated and they flee to Taiwan.
Setting the stage for what we know as modern China.
Exactly. And on October 1st, 1949,
A big day.
Mao Zedong stands in Tiananmen Square and announces the founding of the People's Republic of China.
A new era begins.
And it's an era full of contradictions.
Yeah, the documentary covers the highs and lows of Mao's rule, the land redistribution, the push for industrialization, but also things like the political repression, the cult of personality that surrounded Mao.
Yeah, not to mention the devastating consequences of the Great Leap Forward.
The Great Leap Forward was a disaster. Millions died in the famine that followed. A tragic example of what can happen when utopian ideology just goes too far.
A really dark chapter. And then, of
Yeah.
course, there's the Cultural Revolution, a whole decade of intense social and political upheaval.
All fueled by Mao's desire to purge China of anything that he saw as anti-communist.
It was a chaotic time, full of violence, persecution, and the destruction of cultural artifacts.
Yeah, those images of the Red Guards, those young revolutionaries, are so striking and disturbing.
A reminder of how ideology can be twisted to justify violence,
Yeah.
and how easy it is for young people to get caught up in these sorts of movements.
Yeah, you see that throughout history, unfortunately. But when Mao dies in 1976,
Things start to change.
Deng Xiaoping, his successor, starts to steer China in a new direction.
More pragmatic.
Exactly. Economic reforms, a more open approach to the rest of the world.
So China starts to boom economically.
Yeah, but political reform, that lags far behind. And then in 1989, you have Tiananmen Square.
The world watched in horror as those student-led protests unfolded. Those young people demanding democracy, freedom of speech.
And they were met with such brutal force.
The image of Tank Man standing defiantly in front of that column of tanks is just seared into our collective memory.
It's a powerful symbol of that tension between China's economic progress and their struggle for political freedom.
Tiananmen Square was a real turning point, showing the limits of political reform in China.
And the lengths the Communist Party was willing to go to in order to hold onto power.
And the documentary ends by acknowledging China's rise as a global superpower. But it leaves us with a lot of questions. I mean, what role will China play in the 21st century? Will they ever fully embrace democracy?
Yeah, what will be the ultimate legacy of this long and incredibly complex history? Those are questions for all of us to consider.
It's really incredible when you think about it. Everything that's happened in China leading up to this point.
Yeah.
I mean, from ancient dynasties to the birth of a republic, wars, revolutions, and now this global superpower.
It's a pretty remarkable story of transformation.
It makes you wonder what drives a civilization to change so much.
Yeah.
You know, to endure for so long. What are those forces that shape a nation's destiny?
Yeah, big questions.
But I think this documentary, it helps us understand at least some of those forces. We've seen how powerful ideas can be, the impact that leaders have, the consequences of things like greed and ambition,
Yeah.
and the resilience of people, even when they're facing incredible challenges.
We've also seen that China's story, it's always been intertwined with the rest of the world. I mean, from the Silk Road connecting East and West to the Opium Wars, the rise of Japan, China's fate has always been connected to what's happening globally.
And that connection, I mean, it's stronger than ever today. China's economic growth, their expanding influence, it's shaping the 21st century.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive into Chinese history, it feels less like an ending and more like a beginning,
absolutely.
a beginning that's full of possibilities, but also, uncertainties. We've covered a lot of ground here. You've heard the story, you've seen the patterns, you've met the key players. So what do you think? What's next for China? What will this chapter in their long and complex history look like? That's something for all of us to think about, and I guess we'll just have to wait and see how it all unfolds.